Hello everyone and welcome. In this video I'll be sharing my thoughts on the latest episode of The Walking Dead, Guardians. As always, I won't be holding back on any spoilers, so please do keep that in mind. Anyway, without further ado, let's begin. Let me start off by saying that I think this is a pretty good episode of The Walking Dead. I didn't like it as much as last week's episode, however I certainly didn't dislike it. However, somehow Guardians manages to be one of those weird episodes which contains a lot of shocking standout moments, but also manages to really drag in some places. For the record, I thought the Alpha stuff was great, but the Gabe, Eugene and Rosita side story was a complete waste of time. I've criticised The Walking Dead for its overuse of bottle episodes in the past, but honestly I think this is exactly the type of episode that would have really worked a lot better if it just had spent the entire runtime focused on the Whisperers. Alpha has been a revelation since she came onto the show, however it still feels that we as viewers haven't spent enough time with her or her group yet. Not to sound harsh, but is there really anyone out there who cares whether Gabe is going to stay with Rosita or not?
Excuse me, Predatory. I care about it.
Yeah, well you're a dick. Get back in the cupboard.
Oh man, but I'm hungry and it's cold in here. Oh my god.
So why then devote nearly 10 minutes of the episode to this non-story? Well, the obvious answer to this is that The Walking Dead is planning to kill off Gabe soon, with AMC wanting to play with our emotions by offing Gabe just as he finally finds happiness. Characters in happy, stable relationships usually end up dead on The Walking Dead, and unfortunately after seeing this week's episode, I think Gabe's time is up. I mean, at the end of the episode, Michonne finally agrees to send a convoy to the Kingdom, which causes Aaron to say the ominous phrase, "I hope we don't regret this." And who do we see next to the carriages that are about to head off to the Kingdom? None other than old Father Gabe. In my opinion, you can pretty much bet your house on Gabe dying soon. Even though I didn't really care for Gabe's shitty little side story, I have to say that Eugene did make me laugh when he presented him with his dumb relationship graph and table that he devised. It was such a socially weird thing to do, but strangely something that is in keeping with Eugene's character. Initially I thought Eugene was presenting Gabe with a list of reasons of why he should dump Rosita, and I was waiting for the one-eyed vicar to punch him square in the jaw. However, to Eugene's credit, he actually made a list of reasons as to why Gabe should stay with Rosita, which is kind of sweet but still incredibly weird. And just how awkward was it when Eugene told Gabe that he loved Rosita? Oddly, they both just carried on with the conversation as if nothing had happened, and I think this is due to both of them not wanting to acknowledge what Eugene had just said. Eugene wanted to steer the conversation away from him being in love with Rosita because he realised he had messed up massively by letting this cat out of the bag, and Gabe didn't want to say anything because I don't think he really knew how to react. It was an odd conversation for sure, but also quite a human one. Now before I move on to Alfred and the Whisperers, I want to briefly mention Michonne and Negan, who had a little chat after the latter had returned to his cell. This scene reminded me of a similar conversation that takes place in the comics between Rick and Negan, with Negan offering Rick leadership advice after Rick finds his position under threat. I didn't really think there was anything really wrong with how this scene played out on the show, but watching it just made me think of how much better it would have been if Rick was still around. To be honest, it's pointless moaning about this too much now as there's nothing that can be done about it, but sadly this was just one of those moments which made me realise that deep down I do miss Andrew Lincoln and what he brought to The Walking Dead. Anyway, the conversation that plays out between the two characters wasn't half bad. Essentially, the convo boils down to Negan attempting to convince Michonne that he's changed, with Michonne standing her ground, not believing anything that comes out of his mouth. I can see where both sides are coming from regarding this argument, and at the moment I'm unsure as to who I think is right. Negan believes he's already proved he's changed due to the fact that he returned to his cell after escaping without killing anyone in Alexandria when he easily could have. He then asks Michonne to trust him and says that if she isn't going to kill him, to at least let him do something. Now regardless of whether I like Negan or not, I do think that he has a point here. At the moment, Negan isn't contributing to the community at all by sitting in prison. In fact, he's just an extra mouthful to feed that isn't giving anything back. So instead of having him sit on his own all day in a room, give him a job to do, make some use of him. On the other hand, I completely get why Michonne immediately shot down this suggestion. I mean, how can you ever really come to trust someone who has done the things that Negan has done? Also, even though Negan might be right in saying that he is capable of doing more, so what? He's not in the position to be making recommendations to people, he's a prisoner. He might not like it, but that's just the way it is. So even though their little talk was brief and it did make me pine for Rick, it was a nice moment which seems to be setting up an eventual redemption arc for Negan. Moving on now to what is my favourite part of this week's instalment, that being the time spent with the Whisperers. After last week's episode, Lydia finds herself back alongside her mum, Alpha, who does a good job of terrifying the poor girl from the get-go. When asked about why Daryl wanted to protect her so badly, Lydia lies to her mum, claiming that she manipulated him and did what she had to survive. She lies for much of the episode in an effort to convince her mum that she is loyal to the Whisperers, but you can tell from the start that Alpha isn't really buying any of it. Even punching Henry in the face isn't enough to make Alpha believe that Lydia hates the outsiders as much as she does. Alpha might be creepy, but she's not an idiot. She knows that Henry wouldn't risk his life for Lydia if the two didn't have feelings for each other, and she knows that her daughter is a liar. By the end of the episode, Henry must have wished that he had just stayed at the hilltop. I mean, some of my ex-girlfriend's mums have been a bit mental, but Alpha is on another level. Henry, I know you like Lydia, but dude, it's just not worth it. Just get out of there, go home, wait for Alden to die, and then have pity sex with Enid. Sounds like a good plan. Anyway, where was I? Oh yeah, first Henry has to witness Alpha be challenged by one of her followers, as well as her reaction to said challenge. One of the Whisperers is pissed at Alpha's hypocritical decision to go back and save her daughter, even though the rules forbid any of them going back for those who are lost or missing. The guy then says that she isn't fit to lead and wants to challenge her in order to be the new Alpha. I think this guy must have been expecting to have a one-on-one fight with Alpha, because as soon as she gets her minion Beta to hold a knife to his throat, he complains that she is changing the rules yet again. And I think this really does a great job of showcasing a key difference between her and Negan. Last season, Negan allowed Simon to take him on in a one-on-one fight to the death after Simon challenged his leadership. Negan had more than enough men to kill Simon then and there, thus putting an end to his challenge immediately. But Negan chose to have a fist fight with Simon in order to put on a show in which he could display his dominance in front of his people. And also, even though Negan was pissed at Simon for what he had done, let's remember that the two had been through an awful lot together. And as bizarre as it sounds, I think Negan actually respected someone having the balls to challenge his leadership and was willing to offer Simon a fair fight because of this. Alpha, on the other hand, is someone who has rules in place regarding these types of challenges. And by the looks of it, that rule is that if the Alpha of the pack is challenged, they are supposed to take on their challenger on their own. However, Alpha doesn't care for giving anyone a fair fight or even following the very rules that she made herself. Instead, she just does whatever she needs to survive. There's a kind of irony here in that Negan didn't have any rules in place regarding a potential challenge to his leadership, meaning he could have done whatever the hell he wanted to someone who tried to stage a coup against him, but instead he chose to give Simon a fair fight. Whereas Alpha, who does have rules in place relating to this kind of thing, just doesn't follow them. Now there's two ways of looking at this. You could either say that Negan is a bit of an idiot for risking his life in fighting Simon, and that Alpha is clever in avoiding unnecessary risk by using the tools she has available to her to quickly take down any threat. Or you could argue that Negan was actually rather smart in putting on a show in front of everyone and coming out victorious because he knew his people would respect him more for it. Whereas although Alpha might have secured a position for a bit longer, no one is really going to respect someone who is ultimately too scared to prove themselves in battle. I kind of agree with both these statements, but if I had to pick just one, I'd go with the second option. Alpha sure does talk a lot of talk about how weakness is a negative trait, but ultimately she's weak herself. She couldn't let her daughter go, and she couldn't secure her position as a leader without the help of her muscle Beta, who could easily overthrow her if he wanted to. It seems like being in charge of the Whisperers may prove to be too much for her to handle. Even though I think that deep down Alpha is weak, this doesn't mean that I don't think she's scary, because she is. And this episode did its best to remind us of that fact. I mean, she chops a woman's head clean off, holds it up, and then places that head into her partner's arms before then calling him weak and stabbing him as well. Jesus. She's a full-blown psycho. Whereas it became apparent after a couple of episodes that Negan may have some redeeming features to him, it seems that Alpha doesn't have any at all. She is a horrible, abusive woman. She tells a story about how Lydia nearly died when she was younger when she became tangled in some plastic. And when Lydia did eventually come round after nearly suffocating, she hit her. Come on, what the hell? Your child nearly died. You don't hit them, you hug them. And then hit them after. Alpha said that she had to hit her to make sure she remembered not to do it again, but I'm sure the fact that Lydia nearly died is enough in itself to make her not do it again. Alpha is just an arsehole, but she's a great villain to watch. The second thing Henry has to deal with is nearly being killed by the very girl he came to rescue. Henry is dragged by Beta in the middle of the night to Alpha and Lydia, with Alpha telling her daughter to pick up a knife and kill him. Now Negan might have told Rick to chop off Carl's arm when they first met, but he did this to break Rick down and to get him to bow to him. Negan didn't really want to see Carl lose an arm, and in fact he stopped it from happening. Alpha though is only stopped by a group of walkers descending on the camp just in the nick of time. I'll admit when I first saw this play out I thought this was a rather convenient and contrived way for the two to make it out of this scenario, But when I heard Daryl speak through his Walker face mask, I was all for it. I really loved seeing Daryl use the Whisperer's own tactics against them, and this felt like a nice bit of payback for the death of Jesus. And whilst I'm talking about Daryl, I just want to say I found it hilarious when Connie signed to him to look at her when he speaks. Prior to this, he tried to grunt at her like he sometimes does when she wrote him a message, at which point I thought to myself, Daryl, you idiot, she's deaf. I don't even know what you're saying, so how can she? So I'm glad that she pointed this out to him. And with that, there's not really anything else I want to talk about from this episode. I mean, I could have gone into more details about the goings on at Alexandria, but if I wanted to talk about boring politics, I'd just make a review about the Phantom Menace instead. It's just a bit dull to talk about really, so that's why I didn't really want to mention things like Michonne vetoing decisions and the state of the council at Alexandria, because at the moment, I don't really care that much about it. So sorry if you wanted to hear my thoughts on that, because my thoughts are, I don't care at the moment. I just want to talk about the Whisperers, okay? Sorry. Anyway, I know that's a bit of a negative point to end this review on, but on the whole, I like this episode. Like I said at the start of this video, I think Guardians would have been a much better entry if it had spent its entire runtime solely on the Whisperers. But as it stands, Guardians is a decent, albeit flawed installment of The Walking Dead. So there you go, that's the end of the video. Please let me know your thoughts below. Did you enjoy this episode? Did you dislike it? Or did you just think it was okay? Whatever your thoughts, please let me know in the comments below. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.